All right, we are live. Wait, hold on. Oh, okay. Yeah. StreamYard lost contact to my Facebook account. Okay, that's nice. Let's see if I can get it back. I think we're live on LinkedIn and YouTube right now, but not Facebook. So I'm working on it. Okay, it looks like we got connected. Yay, we're connected. All right, we're good to go. And it is 11:30, so let's get started. So, welcome everybody tuning in and thank you for being with us again this week. We hope you find the session today helpful, and I know you will. This is a good topic, you guys. You need to be here. So, I'm Libby V, nonprofit champion and founder of Libby V and Associates, and through visioning and strategy work, leadership coaching, development support, and organizational and board development, our nonprofit leader clients successfully raise more money and have more impact. But not all nonprofits can afford to hire a consultant. So I created the nonprofit Coffee Talk as a way to provide great content, access to some really great people with helpful information so that as many nonprofit folks as possible can access it. I hope you find it useful. I'm super excited to have as a guest today Dr. Sarah Rubinson Levy, founder, organizational expert, and educator of Sarah Rubinson Consulting and Contracting. And she is here today to discuss striving for excellence, even in the world of nonprofits. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for hosting this series. It's such a wonderful gift for the community.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you to say that. Um, and then let me read your bio because it's fascinating. Um, so, Dr. Sarah Rubinson Levy has been involved in education since 2001. I didn't mention to you that I was a middle school teacher for a while. Um, Working, teaching, consulting, and writing in the areas of supplemental, day school, adult, and experiential education. She has an undergraduate degree in business and sociology and holds a Master of Jewish Education from Hebrew College. Good college, by the way. A doctorate in education from Northeastern University, also a good college, and certificates in advanced Jewish studies, day school education, and Jewish educational leadership. Most recently, she was a founding head of school. Oh my gosh, congratulations for Einstein Academy, a progressive private school in Denver, Colorado. So, Sarah's approach integrates empathy and curiosity with research to work with the organization in a way that's both realistic and aspirational. I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. All right. So, you guys, if you have questions out there, post them in your chat wherever you're watching this, and we will respond to those. Um, and let's get started, Sarah, with our conversation. So let's just talk about this topic of striving for excellence. Often nonprofits, it's just kind of common across the sector, sort of get into a poverty mindset because of, and it's not like that they're negative people. It's just that they work in this atmosphere, always trying to be scrappy and find money. And, you just can't help but get into that. It's hard not to get into a poverty mindset. So excellence just kind of seems like it feels out of reach to a certain degree. So let's talk about that, why it's important, and how do you do that if you're a nonprofit person, whether staff or board.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an important question and such an important topic. And to me, it seems so relevant and clear. And yet I've been so surprised in my work with nonprofit that it just isn't. Like you mentioned, my undergrad is actually in business. I started out in the business world, and that's, I think, the biggest contributing factor to my mindset. I didn't start in nonprofit. I didn't start in education. I started in business. I was working with Neiman Marcus. And I went through a whole career shift because I realized, like, existentially, that's not what I wanted to do. And I took a lot of the same principles that I learned in business school and in the for-profit world and have applied it in my own career. And things have just been really surprising to me over the last 20 years that I've been in nonprofit, mostly in education. Things like not having a balanced budget, things like collecting data but never analyzing it, things like being really reluctant to make staffing changes, even though you know what it's best for the business. And I have been really fascinated by this mindset of we're nonprofit, therefore we're a nonprofit, therefore we don't run like a business. We're a nonprofit, therefore we have lots of excuses about why we can't do anything because we're a nonprofit. And I'm not really sure where that came from and why that has to be how it is, because I don't think it has to be how it is. And you mentioned that I was a founding head of school. That was one of the reasons that my co-founder and I started a school, was because we both came from a business background. We were both very frustrated by working with different organizations that had excuses for everything, that all really boiled down to, we're a nonprofit, therefore we don't have to follow best practices. It's okay for us to maintain the status quo and things like that. So we started the school in part as a little bit of an experiment to show what could happen if you didn't have that in your back pocket. And I just think that it's just such an important mind shift for all nonprofit workers, leaders, funders, donors, board members, to just keep in mind, like, nonprofit doesn't mean what some of us think that it means. It doesn't mean status quo. It doesn't mean mediocrity. It doesn't mean always, like you said, like scraping for dollars. Nonprofit is just like a tax.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And then what you do with that nonprofit and how you conduct your business is totally independent of your 501c3 status.
That's right. That's exactly it. Yeah. The only thing it does, right, when you have a 501c3 designation or another nonprofit designation from the IRS, it's just says that you can't give your net proceeds to any stockholders or, or board members. That's it. Yeah. So, but it is misunderstood, and everybody thinks nonprofit means you can't have a profit, you can't think about money, you can't, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it also goes to, like, you can't pay your employees well, you can't, I remember my first job, and this has stuck with me so much. My very first job in the nonprofit world, I was being paid very little. In fact, my father used to make jokes with me that I probably qualified for food stamps, even though I was working full time.
Yeah.
And I went to my supervisor and to have a conversation about it. And his response was, well, we really view your position as like half volunteer, half paid. And that's just how it was justified in terms of why they got away with paying me so little, because we're a nonprofit and people who work in the nonprofit world, like, they're basically volunteering, but getting paid a little bit. And that's just another space where just because you're nonprofit doesn't mean that you pay employees poorly.
That's right. That's right. It's, it's a business, and, if you're going to keep your people, you're going to have to pay them. I can remember, Sarah, I had a really similar experience. I mentioned to family members that or somebody that I can't remember who said this, that I was going to get my master's in social work. And he said, "Oh, you're committing yourself to a lifetime of poverty, huh?" And I was like, "What?" Like, that's what people think. That is what people think. And it's kind of true to a certain degree. I mean, it actually is a reality in a lot of nonprofits, that people don't make a very good living wage that work, and they work as hard and have to be, as smart and as capable as for-profit employees.
And the justification that I've heard from a lot of nonprofits with whom I've worked is, we don't have the money. We wish we could, but we don't have the money. And yet, if you sit down and look at their budget, they spend money in a different way than for-profit businesses do. If I were to walk down the street and find the for-profit business and look at their books, like, they are much more careful in many circumstances about how they spend every single penny. And they want, in part because their profits go to their shareholders and their shareholders hold them accountable. And yet the number of nonprofits that I've worked with that spend X dollars on overnight shipping because they forgot to order the supplies, or X dollars on an employee that they actually is pretty redundant, but they've been there for 50 years and we have to keep them there, or X dollars on some mistake that they made because they didn't have the right person in place to make the decision in the first place. If you
Yes.
look at the budgets of many of these nonprofits, like they have the money. It's just that they're not choosing to spend it in strategic ways. So I get really frustrated by that conversation also.
Yeah, I agree. And, because of that, all that expectation, you know, I think nonprofit leaders feel, and including board members and executives feel hesitant to pay people what they should be paid because they're afraid of the judgment of the broader community, or whatever. It's a real quagmire. It really is. So keep going, keep talking. This is great.
Well, so I started with the idea of comparing the for-profits and nonprofits. So to continue that way, when we think about striving for excellence, even in the world of nonprofits, a space that really baffles me is how little I've seen nonprofits take from sort of the best practices of the for-profit world.
Mhm.
I just finished a project working with a community organization about evaluation of a program.
Mhm.
And we had to take a whole step back because they hadn't first started with articulating the goals of their program. And so in the for-profit world, you would never do that. You would never
No,
launch a program without
no.
clearly articulated goals and indicators and outcomes. And yet here was a community organization that had brought me in to tell them whether or not they were doing a good job, but nobody on the team could articulate what doing a good job would
Right.
look like.
Yeah.
And starting with something as simple as that is, for-profits, they are accountable to the powers that be for everything that they do.
Yeah.
And so they're very good. Many of them, the ones that are better run, are really good about strategically defining what are we doing? What initiatives
Yes.
are we doing? What are we taking on? What will success look like? What is the timeline? What is the budget? And having that all in place to start with. And yes, it takes additional time at the start, but then the whole process that you go through during the initiative is much more simple. And by the
Mhm.
time you get to the end, it is much easier to define success. And that's something
Yes.
so important for nonprofits to take
Yeah.
on. A, because it can lead to better success, but B, because if you've ever applied for a grant and have to do reporting requirements, that's an essential part of that. And it's much more beneficial to do that from the start than to try to scramble at the end and try to pretend that you had it in place the whole time.
Yeah, it's crazy. Thank you for raising that, because it is wild that in the nonprofit sector, at least traditionally, we have our activities. We don't set our desired outcomes first and have that drive what activities we do. We do activities and then go, hey, what are we getting out of this? Is it what we think we should? And it's just so backwards. It's like, what? I don't, it just has traditionally been that way so long. We haven't even challenged it. And so the notion of like, no, let's start with the end in mind. Who are we serving and what outcomes do we hope to help them achieve? And then let's decide, well, what do we need to do to get them there? And it's very consistently applied across everything nonprofits do, not just their services, but even like their fundraising activities and the events they have and everything. And it's just like, well, let's do this great thing. So I love this challenge of thinking about it first, the outcomes you want.
Yeah, and that can come down to everything. I recently, I have no concept of time anymore, so it was probably a year ago. I read a book by this woman named Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering.
Uh-huh.
And it was so simple and yet so brilliant in that she talks about defining outcomes and goals for any gathering. So even if it's a meeting, if it's an annual event, if it's a program, and she talks about the difference between like a purpose and a category. So, annual event is not a purpose, it's a category. Board retreat is not a purpose, it's a category. And to really think about why we're doing this, what we're trying to accomplish with it, and then think about how to get there. Instead, like you said, instead of afterwards being like, well, our annual event made $500,000, it was a success. Yes, and if people thought the speaker was boring and people didn't connect and things like that, is it a success? I don't know. If before you had defined your goal as raising $500,000, then yes, it's a success. But you don't know that.
Right. That's right. And even for meetings, I love that you raised that too, right? Like I always start with, well, what are we trying to achieve by the end of this meeting? And always, for board retreats, it's like, what would be a successful board retreat? Like, let's start there, and then we can figure out what we need to do. But the tail wags the dog a lot in nonprofits. That's the metaphor I use to describe it. But love this conversation. Keep going.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, like, I think that part of the challenge, one of the themes that we've talked about over the course of the last 15 minutes, is that nonprofits do come from this like scrappy mindset. And it's not only with money, but it has to do with time. And taking, an hour with your leadership team to come up with goals and outcomes for an upcoming program is so important. And yet so many people would be like, oh, that's the first thing to go because I have to return these 7 phone calls and run these different errands and things like that. And so we so rarely, one of the things that I am really big on when I work with clients is the process. And making sure that we're investing in the process, fully recognizing that it takes more time up front, making sure that you're getting the stakeholders involved, making sure that you're articulating where you're going and what success looks like, making sure that you have a scaffold and framework for execution in place before you do it. But so often in the nonprofit world, we're like building the plane while we're flying it because we didn't even know where we're going. We just needed to take off as soon as possible. Right. And I 100%, especially in this world of, AI emerging and post-COVID and things like that, we need to be leaving space for pivoting and being open to possibility and what that looks like. And we need to have a compass and a sense of where we're going.
Yes, absolutely. And that notion of, here are the outcomes we want to achieve. These are the activities that we believe will lead to those outcomes. But let's not stop there. Let's check in and see if in fact they are, and kind of articulate, some indicators that, this is working. And that can be your red flag, your warning system that it's working or it's not, right? And then let's kind of learn what works and what doesn't along the way. And that is critical. And it's very absent because of the short staffing and not enough money and not enough time that nonprofits face. But it's got to be there. It's like there's nothing more important for a nonprofit than understanding if what you're doing is working and where it's not, and stop doing what's not working because there's just not enough time or resources to do things that don't work to get you your results.
Libby, I have a question for you. Because I think about this a lot. You just talked about how there's not enough time and not enough resources. And I'm curious, I don't think it's a black and white answer. So I'm curious to what extent you think that in the world of nonprofits, objectively speaking, there's not enough time and not enough resources versus we have a mindset of in the nonprofit world, we don't have enough time or resources.
I was saying that from combining all that's what they think, and it could be their reality, but it might not be their reality. So when people say that to me, clients or people I'm interacting with, I say, well, do you have the time not to do it? Because do you have time to do stuff that doesn't really bring you the outcomes that you're aiming for? Like, let's figure that out. Let's figure out what's working and what's not, and stop doing the stuff that's not working, right? Stop doing the stuff that's not helping, that's not advancing the way you want to advance and not getting you the outcomes you want. And I do think, anytime somebody says, I don't have enough time, it's really about prioritization and value, of that thing, whatever it is. And so it's perceived and real, right? It can be both. It can be either. So great question. I love that.
Well, and I love the approach that you're taking with that because I totally agree. I'm a firm believer and we have time for whatever we decide is important.
Yep.
And a challenge is that when we feel like everything is important, then we don't have time. And so really, going back to what we were just talking about in terms of a process and identifying goals and things like that, like on any given day for any of us, there's a million things we could and should be doing. And how do we define what is a priority? It should be what gets us to our goal. You know,
That's right.
for example, is working on their social media strategy, and they're currently on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and yet they're spending a third of their time on each of these platforms, but they're getting nothing from Instagram. Like, drop the Instagram. You know, it's very important, like we've been talking about, to set what are we trying to accomplish? How are we trying to get there? And then taking the time, like you mentioned, to evaluate what is working, what isn't working. And if we're supposed to be working on social media, then if like that person is also handing out flyers at the local Starbucks, like that shouldn't be happening because it's not part of a social media strategy. So really streamlining what it is that we're doing is such a simple way to be freeing up time.
Yeah, I can remember back in 1997, I was working in an organization, and we got trained on this notion of outcomes and identifying the outcomes that you want to achieve, and then creating milestones that tell you if you're on the way, and you know, always asking the question, so what? And that stuck with me forever. And it's this notion of like, we do such and such, so what? And it's not like, so what sarcastically, it's so what will happen? Right. You know, it's the why. Like, why do you do that? And I started challenging everything. You know, a staff member would come to me and they'd be like, hey, we want to take the kids to a baseball game. And I'd be like, why? Like, how is that going to help, you know, advance them and what, you know, and sometimes I was overboard and my staff were like, just so they can have a great day. That's why we want to take them. And I'd be like, all right. But, you know, you do have to be a little rigorous about really asking those questions. Like, is what we're doing, you know, we're doing this, so what? So that our clients, or so that our organization, or so that, right? And so that so what question became part of my vocabulary. And it's just, it is a question about logic, right? We're doing this because the logic tells us that, you know, it'll get us to a result. And we need to do that more. And you're right. If you are clear on what you're trying to achieve, then you can say no to some things that don't get you to where you're trying to get to. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, like, I love that approach because it's, you know, my motto in the world right now is just being open to what might be and approaching the world with curiosity. And at the same time, I'm very grounded in my core values. And so my core values are excellence and passion and curiosity. And so I'm not going to be open to something that directly goes against my values. Yeah. And as somebody who admittedly is change averse and not an early adopter, it's something that I have to remind myself every day to be open to new possibilities. And there was a book that I read many years ago. It's called Wait, What? By James Ryan. It was originally a Harvard commencement speech, which he then turned into a book. And it's like 5 questions that can change your world. And it's really coming from this approach instead of just doing things because they've always been done or making assumptions about what people are saying, really just asking and questioning everything, you know, questioning the annual event. Just because we did it every year doesn't mean that we have to do it. You know, questioning why you're doing something. Does it align with your goals? Does it align with your values? And not just doing things just to do them. And at the same time, being open and coming from a place of curiosity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is kind of the secret sauce here, right? It's kind of simple when you think about it. If we're just always asking, you know, like, what are we trying, what is the outcome we want, or what's our goal, or whatever language you use, what are the results we want to get? You know, when we start talking about doing something and always challenging, you know, it is what we're doing leading us to achieve the results that we want. Yeah. I think if you just ask those questions and keep pushing, that you get some clarity and you get to be, you know, freed up to do the stuff that really
matters.
Yeah.
For
Well,
lack of a
in
better
the
term.
nonprofit world, I think it's especially important to think about how we're framing those questions. Because like we've alluded to, I have at least experienced the nonprofit world to be free of excuses. Like, we can't do this because, we can't do this because. So instead, just simply reframing things as how might we? Just getting rid of that barrier, coming from an abundance mindset, just putting out into the universe, like, how might we achieve our goals? How might we, fine, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough money, but how might we do this anyway? And just
I love that.
place.
Somebody, oh gosh, I wish I could remember who, because this stuck with me so much. I love that. How might we? But what they say is not yet. We can't do blah, blah, blah. Not yet. I met with somebody this morning and she's like, I'm really great at talking to people. And when I can make my pitch to them, they give me a donation for my nonprofit organization, but I'm not really a good fundraiser. And I said, not yet, and she's like, oh, so that also is another way. So I love that. How might we? How might we? And what was the book you mentioned? Because I'm going to put it in here and I'm interested in it.
Wait, What by James Ryan.
Oh,
it's very short. You could read it in an hour.
Yeah. Good. I love that.
And I've actually done it as a book study with staff so that we all have this shared language, so that we're all in this mindset of asking these questions.
Yes. Love it. I'm going to order it. What do you have coming up that people might be interested in? Like, you have a lot of cool stuff going on, and we were chatting before, by the way, everybody out there, and both of us like to give stuff away. We just like to add to the social good out there in the world. So Sarah has some stuff too that she just provides free. So
I do. I'm really in this space of empowering excellence. My specific niche is education and systems and evaluation, and asking these questions and being goal-oriented is not education specific. And so I am more than happy to talk to anybody about anything that we've talked about today, about what this could look like, answer any questions, things like that. I'm currently really leaning into the space of artificial intelligence, not really because I wanted to, but because the conversations that I wanted to see around it weren't happening in the world of education. It's a lot of, going back to what we were talking about, like, how might we use artificial intelligence to streamline the role of teachers in our organizations and enhance student learning? So that's a space that I'm really into right now. I'm actually giving a TEDx talk in September about this, using ChatGPT as a catalyst for change in all of education. Again, it is specifically education, and it's not. ChatGPT and the advance of AI, I believe, should be a catalyst for us to reevaluate lots of the things that we're doing. Libby and I, we've been talking a lot about short-staffed. How might we use AI to get over some of the challenges that we've been having? And so that's a space that I'm really leaning into. I have a lot of blogs on my website and things like that about ways to integrate AI and questions to be asking about AI. So feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to follow me if you're free to ask any questions. I firmly believe, at least in the world of AI, and Libby, this pertains to the world of, I think that we have an incredible responsibility and obligation and opportunity to be shaping the way that our world develops. And it's up to us to be using it for the power of good. So I am happy to contribute to that conversation however possible.
That's great. Appreciate that so much. So what is your website? And I'll drop that into the chat too.
So it's Sarah Rubinson, SarahRubinson.com.
Thank you. Okay. I dropped that in there. And so I just have one last thing, first of all, to thank you for being on today. This was fantastic. It's something that I am passionate about. So I appreciate all that you taught me today and taught everybody out there who is currently watching and listening, and who will in the future watch the recording. This is great. And then just a real quick opportunity for you out there too in the nonprofit world. A colleague and I are putting on some free workshop sessions on major gift fundraising, and we call that impact giving. And so we're giving everybody who attends, and one of them is tomorrow morning Eastern time. So I'll put the link to that
in the chat, but this is like easy to implement tips and techniques that'll help boost your fundraising. So we cover like, how do you qualify a prospective donor? What are some techniques for getting a first meeting with a potential major giver? How do you move them from a prospect to actually donating? How do you identify some cues for when it's time to ask for the gift? How do you use impact giving in your annual major corporate foundation gift strategies? And those kinds of things. So I'm going to pop that into the chat, and click on the link and register if you'd like to boost your fundraising. So it's been really great. We had one session a couple weeks ago and people raved about it. And so we're excited to continue. We have 5 more, so including tomorrow. Okay, well, I mean, that's it for us today. Any final thoughts that you have, Sarah, that you wanted to share?
No, this is so fun. Obviously, I'm super passionate about the nonprofit world and the impact we can have. So I just really appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you all have a good day, including you, Sarah. And we'll see you soon on the next Nonprofit Coffee Talk. Take care, everybody.